When we disagree, there's a reason for that. It's because anytime you talk about Revelation, or frankly Christian theology, you're going to have differing opinions. And that's not something to be threatening. That's something actually to celebrate. And so let's continue to link arms, partner together, and dive into this incredible book. Okay. So we looked at historical context, learning who the people were, figuring out what tensions they were experiencing, so that hopefully, like what God did for us, we can do for the text. We can put flesh on it and not just read it as these, black and white and sometimes red letters, but this is actual people. And if you put yourself in this position, this is the reason why, and I think Satan is so wily. He is so sly, because there are words that I have used for years that help unlock the Bible, that he then grabs in the public sphere, twists them, and then you're not able to say them. But I'm going to say it anyway, because even though he twists words, I'm going to pull them back in the name of Jesus. I believe that the number one tool of studying the Bible is empathy. Actually, empathy is different than sympathy. Sympathy means, oh man, you're going through a rough time, I feel bad for you. Empathy is putting on the flesh and experiencing the emotion of the other person in yourself. Like you actually take on what they have experienced and you experience it as if you are experiencing it. And for me, there's no better word, even though that word is taking a beating in the public sphere right now, which I think is a satanic strategy. Because if he can get us to not see anything from anyone else's perspective, then what are we left with? Selves. Anytime the self is exalted, we start to have a problem. Anytime. So, when it comes to empathy, I'm saying let's take the word back. Because the best way to read the Bible is to be able to experience it through what they were experiencing. And the tension they were experiencing at the end of the first century, not knowing if they were going to be ratted out by their community, not knowing if they were going to lose their jobs because of their faith in Jesus, or be exiled to an island, or even be killed like Antipas in the city of Pergamum because of their faith in Jesus, creates a collective anxiety, a tension, an agitation. And whenever you are being pushed to your breaking point, at times you can be tempted to not act like yourself. Even if you've been a Christian for 40 years, whenever you are moved to a point of agitation and anxiety, you can be tempted to act like someone else, betraying even allegiances that you were birthed into as a kid. That's what they are experiencing. Some are choosing to compromise. Some are choosing to negotiate their faith, to kind of rebaptize it in the Roman society so that it can be a little bit more serviceable for their family and for their people. And some in that early church were simply being persecuted and dying for their faith because they would not compromise on what Christ called them to. Like, I just want to press pause and say this. I don't think it's really difficult for us to not just overhear that conversation, but to take it into 2025. I was preaching at a church last weekend. I was preaching on Matthew. Oh, sorry. I can't itch that part of my face without the microphone doing weird stuff. No? Okay. And I was going over Matthew 24 and 25, but I went to Matthew 16. And it's the great confession. It's where Peter's like, you're the Christ, the Son of the living God. And Jesus is like, yes, Simon, son of Jonah. I'm not even going to call you that anymore. I'm going to call you Peter. Why? Because this is a monumental moment, so big that your name should change. He's like, as a matter of fact, this wasn't revealed to you by men because men can't see this. This was revealed to you by God himself. And on this confession, on this rock, I'm going to build my church and the gates of Hades won't overcome it. And everybody's like, yeah, Peter. 3 verses later. In verse 21, it says, from that time on, now that they know who Jesus is, from that time on, Jesus began to explain to them about the Christ. He began to say, as the Christ, I'm going to go to Jerusalem. I'm going to suffer at the hands of the chief leaders, the chief priests, the Jewish elite, and then I'm going to be killed, and 3 days later I'm going to resurrect. And then it says this in verse 19. It says, at this, Peter took Jesus aside and rebuked him. And then it says two words next to each other that I find to be absurd. Peter says, never, Lord. Like, if he's your Lord, you don't get to tell him never of what he says. If he's your Lord, even if it's the exact opposite of what you expect and demand, if he says it, you do it. Otherwise, stop calling him Lord. Because he's not. If Jesus says it, you do it. Period. If Jesus values it, you value it. Period. Never say, well, I know Jesus said this, but there's no but. There's no and yet, which is just a fancy but, that's it. No, if Jesus says it, that's it. Never Lord, you can call him anything you want, but stop calling him Lord if you don't listen to what he says. Stop it. That's ridiculous. And that's what John is saying to the churches of Revelation. Jesus is the one that you are claiming. As a matter of fact, the first 5 words of Revelation get overlooked so often. Like, people are like, what's this book about? I'm like, he spends the first 5 words just saying it as clear as he can. Here it is. The revelation of Jesus Christ. First 5 words of the book. Like, I'm like, we don't need to guess. He tells you, I want to talk about Jesus. I want to talk about him. And we're like, is that all? What do you mean, is that all? As if that's less than. No, of course that's all. But trust me, you talk about Jesus enough, you might experience conflict. You know what I mean? Now make sure that when that conflict comes, they're actually conflicting with the words of Jesus and not with you as a cantankerous Christian. Your attitude shouldn't be what bristle people. Trust me, just say the words of Jesus as benign and as reserved as you can. It will do enough damage. Don't be, I tell my students, I say, as Christians, we were called to suffer, not to be insufferable. For the love of God. Like most people that are like, yeah, I'm being persecuted for Christ. No, you're being persecuted because you're a jerk. And there's a difference. As a matter of fact, Paul even says in Romans 12, be at peace with everyone, inasmuch as it is up to you. Because he also knows that whenever you're holding to the kingship of Christ, there's going to be conflict. But it's not conflict that is birthed by you being a punk. It's conflict birthed because Jesus wants all of you. Everything. Nothing left over. That will always cause tension. That will always cause conflict because there are other things and other people demanding parts of you, and sometimes even all of you. Jesus says, I won't compromise. And as Christians, we shouldn't either. And this is what John is trying to get those 7 churches of Revelation to understand. Compromise is not an option here if you're going to still stay and be a Christian. Not an option. Does this make sense? With that context, you'll read this book different. But even with that context, sometimes this book can be hard to read. I mean, let's be honest. This book is weird. Like, let's just say it. Like, we're going to talk about it on Sunday. I'm like, I was talking to Seth, and it's like, yeah, you're preaching Revelation 12, and I'm sitting there thinking, like, okay, the passage where a dragon tries to eat a baby, that's what you gave me as your guest speaker? Okay. It's like saying, hey, I want you to preach, but you have to wear this Halloween costume. Like, it's going to be awkward for everyone, but apparently it's a part of the gig, and I don't get a choice. So, but it's a weird book. Because not only are there dragons trying to eat babies, there's going to be a beast coming out of the sea and one out of the land, and you got to preach that the next 2 weeks. Good luck, friends. And then there's like this prostitute that's astride the beast, and then she gets eaten by the beast in 10 Kings, and it's like, okay, what happened to like the gospel? Like, like Jesus just walking and healing people. It's there, you just have to know how to read it. You just have to know how to see it. And that's why we need to talk about symbols. Now, whenever I say the word symbols, immediately in our mind, a debate comes up whether we want it to or not. People will usually ask me in some form of a question like, now, do you read the Bible literally or figuratively? And what they're asking is the moment I say symbols, they're like, so you don't really read the Bible? You just make it up? Okay, a couple of things. First of all, figurative doesn't mean you make it up. Second of all, language doesn't work this way. Like, language doesn't fit into these nice little neat boxes of only literal, only figurative. I just use a figurative expression to explain something literally. The nice neat boxes, did you catch that? And did any of you go, hey, you're not saying the real thing, you're saying something that you just made up figuratively? No. You all knew what I was saying, right? Why? Because that's how language works. It moves in and out of literal and figurative language. As a matter of fact, even the definition of the word literal is a little bit funny. It means letter by letter. It comes from the Latin litera, letter by letter. And you understand that all that letters and words are symbols that we've all agreed upon. So, like, all that is a symbol. But the moment that I do this, now we have multiple symbols that have come together, and in this organization, we pronounce it a certain way and it means a certain thing in your head. Every word is a symbol, even when you're talking about something literal. Like, for example, dog. You have something in your head? Is it a llama? No, why? Because I said the word dog. And the word dog points to something, at least a category. Now, what if I do this? White dog. Did it change? White dog. Now, what if I say this? Small white dog. Did it change again? What if I said this? Bichon Frise. Some of you are like, yep. Some of you are like, don't even know what that is. You're like, is it a llama? Like, what's going on? It's a small white dog. Now, what if I said this? Samson. Everybody's like, not getting it. There's two people in here that do get it outside of me. My mom and my dad. Why? Because Samson is the name of my little white dog, Bichon Frise, at home. Notice what I did there, though. I started broad, dog, white dog. I kept getting closer and closer. That's what words do. They're all symbols, but the more that you string together, the more it narrows down. The problem is when I landed on that last word, it was so specific and you didn't have the context, it meant nothing to you. But I was doing the exact same thing whenever I started with dog all the way to the word Samson. This is the way language works. Like, oh man, did you see the sunset last night? Some of you are like, you mean the earth rotating? No. Meant the sun setting. See the issue? We use this all the time, nonstop. So to say I take the Bible literally and not figuratively is saying you deny the way that language works. And typically that serves us even if we're not consistent. No, here's the way language works. Language is always trying to grab what is beyond us and bring it to us so that we can engage it. That's what it always does. So I tell my students, I say, I don't want you reading Revelation literally or figuratively. I want you to read it naturally. If he literally wants you to interpret it as a symbol, interpret it figuratively. Because that's the literal way to interpret that. Does that make sense? These categories are fabricated. They don't actually exist in the way we speak, or in the way that we read, or in the way that they spoke, lived, and read. Which is why we need to dive into symbols, because symbols have power. Let me give you an example. Why not just say, I don't like you? Why do this? Why? Because they are powerful. But what, I mean, isn't that just a piece of fabric? Isn't this interesting? We do this with symbols all the time. We think that it just points to something. We do this a lot with the Lord's Supper. It's just a symbol. I don't think you know what the word symbol means, friend. Because actually, whatever it points to, the New Testament believes whatever it points to, on some level it contains a portion of. like for example, if you walked out there, and if you do this, I'll do my best. But if you walked out to the table, grabbed one of my books, and just started ripping pages out of it, it might actually hurt me a little. But here's what's weird. It's just paper. But is it? Because that paper and that location and that binding took a lot of blood, sweat, and tears. And even though I do my best, I try not to read any reviews of anything online about anything, but every once in a while I'll come across one and they're like, this is garbage. And I'm like, ugh. But they're just talking about an object, right? Well, kind of. Be like if your picture was out there and everybody else's picture was out there, but somebody walked up to yours and drew horns on it and, darkened in the teeth. You wouldn't be like, I'm loved. You would feel assaulted. You would feel attacked. Why? Because symbols don't just point to something, they actually contain a portion of what they point to, which is why this is so appalling. Because it's not just a piece of fabric, even though it's just a piece of fabric. It's that fabric in that location, in that organization, means something that is so significant that when they do this, it hurts. Right? I learned this whenever I was in my, at the age of 19, I started preaching at a church on the weekends in college. So for the next 2.5 years, sophomore year through my senior year, I preached at this church. It was a small church. Matter of fact, I never had attended a church over 200 until, 2007, when I came back to Joplin. This first church, though, when I went to go preach the first Sunday, at the time, my now wife, but she was my girlfriend at the time, we went, and when I went to preach, there were 8 of us in the room. When I mean small church, I mean this was a small church. But there was one faithful woman in this church that even over the 2.5 years, as more people were coming and we were gathering as a community, the one faithful presence was this woman by the name of Ruby. First Sunday I met Ruby. I walk up to her, we're in the foyer, and we're talking about the mural that somebody had painted, and she knew the person that painted and even helped them assist it whenever they did it, like 40 years earlier. And while we're talking, Ruby had this button-up shirt, and she had a shirt that had a pocket on it. And while we're talking, she just reached into her shirt, grabbed something, and put it to her lips, and then put it back. And I remember going, what was that? But I didn't. It was my first Sunday there, and I didn't want to bring it up. And over the next couple of years, I would see Ruby do this almost every Sunday. She'd always wear the same type of shirts, always have something in her pocket, put it to her lips, put it back. One Sunday, about 2 years in, we had a potluck every Sunday. It was like my absolute favorite thing in the world. Like lemon meringue that was like this big. You're like, oh my gosh! Like you have like a steak knife just to get through it. It was awesome. So, but we're at a potluck, and our whole table got up to get seconds or thirds. I can't remember. And it was just me and Ruby, and we're talking, and she does her ritual. And I went, hey Ruby, I said, if I'm crossing a line, just tell me. I said, Can you tell me what you're doing when you reach into your pocket and put something to your mouth? And man, she immediately turned red. And I was like, hey, I'm sorry. She's like, no, you didn't cross the line, Shane. You're okay. And she goes, I honestly don't even realize I do it. She was here, and she reached into her pocket, and she pulled out this really worn, tattered picture of a young man. And she said, this is my son. He died about 20 years ago. And I always keep this in my pocket because I want him close to my heart. And every time I miss him, I pull it out, put it to my lips, give him a kiss, and put it back. You know what I didn't say? You know that's just a picture, right, Ruby? No, it isn't. There's something more there. Why? Because symbols have power. And if you understand that whatever the symbol is pointing to, it contains a portion of, you understand that the Lord's Supper is not just remembering something, it's ingesting the story that you claim to belong to. And what you eat, you become. And we're eating the body and the blood of Jesus. See what I mean? Like, what if we took that a little more seriously? Like, this sounds Catholic. It actually sounds biblical, is what it sounds. Where do I get the idea that what you eat, you become? Genesis 3. They ate the fruit and became death. This is the story from in the beginning. This is what we experience in even just diet conversations. What you eat, you become. But this also plays out in symbols. Symbols have power. So I want to put a symbol up here, and I want you just to describe what you see. And it can be as boring, bland, or as specific as you desire. Okay? So what do you see? Love. What is that? Did you say heresy? Heresy because of Cincinnati Bible College. I'm going to let that sit. God, R.I.P. Okay. What else do you see? Father and a son. What was that? A dad? A new dad? Joy? Pride? Interesting. You're right. That person on the right is short hair Shane with crazy sideburns. That is me. And what's even wilder for me is that's my now 21-year-old son. And so it's fascinating. We went abstract, and then we went kind of specific. But the moment that you make it personal, this starts to take on a different depth. Why? Because all pictures are symbols that point to something. There's actually a lot more emotion here for me. Because I had literally just woken up. I'm still jet lagging a bit. Because I had been, for the last 20 days, traveling to all 7 cities of Revelation into Rome. And I had just woken up. The reason why I know that is because that robe that's on him, I got in Turkey. It's made of Turkish cotton. And all 4 of our kids wore it. And whenever you put the hood up over the head, it's got a little dog tongue. And my son just got out of the bath. That's why his hair looks wet. And this is me waking up and holding my son after 20 days being gone. Notice what I just did. What I did was I created the context. And the moment that I created the context, even though for me this is a direct feeling, you're now able to overhear it by attaching it to your contexts. That's what we're doing when we're reading the Bible. That's what we're doing. We're looking at symbols in Revelation. Let's do one more of these pictures. What do you see? Say it again. Okay, we have a new dad. Short-haired Shane. Now, that's interesting. That's the second thing that was said. How do you know it so quick? Because you already had a prior interaction with another symbol. Now, you have a new context to engage this one. What else do you see? Say it again. A date. So now we're bringing numbers into this mess. What is the date? March 11th, 2006. That is true only if you're in America. Because if you go overseas anywhere else, it's November the 3rd because they always put the day and then the month. But you guessed it right because you know our context. We share a context. Everybody's familiar with it. You nailed it. Now, let me add some depth to this. Those numbers are very significant to me because that's the birthday of my 19-year-old daughter. And this is the first time I am holding my baby girl, my only girl. Symbols have power. But the only way you can get that power, that you can experience the depth of it, is if you have the context. Without the context, it means nothing. It's just a couple of numbers thrown together. Here's why this is so important when we're studying the book of Revelation. Because every single furniture, every meteorological pattern, every color, every number, every emblem in Revelation is a symbol for something. It's bringing in a context. And if you do not know that context, you will make up stuff in this book that look like Apache helicopters. You know what I mean? 1970, Hal Lindsey, The Late Great Planet Earth. That's what he said that the locusts were in Revelation chapter 9. You want to know why? Because he didn't understand all of the symbols that were present. So let's take this and let's play this out. Let's look at numbers for a second. Numbers in Revelation always point to something else. I always teach my students, I say, you never measure the numbers in Revelation, you weigh them. Measure would be like this, 5, 6, 7. I measured it. There are 7 horns on the Lamb in Revelation 5. Okay, but what does that weigh? What is the symbolic weight to it? Well, let's piece it together. First thing you need to know is horns in Jewish literature, going back to Daniel chapter 7 and Daniel 9, is a symbol for power. Power. 7 is a number of completion usually attached to a creative act. Where do I get that idea? Yeah, the first chapter in the Bible, Genesis 1. God creates how many days? Technically 6 for those legalists. But then he adds on a 7th. And the Jews didn't believe that was incidental. They didn't think that was accidental. Like, they didn't think that God got done through 6 days and he goes, okay, one more day. And then he gets to that day and he's just like, dude, I'm exhausted. Like, I ended with the platypus. Like, it's clearly going down from here. Let's just take the day off. We'll just call it good. No, they believed that God brought it to 7 because they believed that in that complete creative act, both the work and the rest, it was all whole. That may be something for us to reflect on, you know what I mean? Man, there's some of us that are really good at working and some of us that are really good at resting. We have words for both of them. Lazy and everything that the boss has ever dreamed of. But both of them are unhealthy. Both of them are unholy. You were made to work and to Sabbath. And if you do not have a healthy rhythm, you will not be healthy. Which is the reason why. Even though I had all my family here last night, they were so gracious whenever I said, I'm so exhausted, I just want to go back to my hotel and go to bed. And they were like, that's great, we'll see you tomorrow. You have to have both. The Jews believed, though, that in God creating that full creative act, that the number 7 didn't just point to something, but contained something in it that was complete and connected to the creative act. Now bring it to the 7 horns on the Lamb. Complete power associated with an creative or a recreating act. Now that carries a weight to it. Or let's take a different number. Let's take the number, let's do 12. Nah, that one's a little bit, no, we'll do it. A number of completion usually attached to God's people. Does that shock you? No, where do I get that? 12 tribes of Israel and 12 disciples. We've already talked about this. So whenever we see the 144,000, 144 is what times what? It shouldn't shock you then that it is connected to God's people. Although you're like, but what about the 3 zeros? Well, let's look at the number 10. The number 10 is a number of completion, usually, this is a long one, usually attached to a time period of suffering or persecution through which God proves to be faithful. I'm going to say that again. The number 10 is a number of completion usually attached to a time period of suffering or persecution through which God proves to be faithful. Where do I get that? Daniel chapter 1. Daniel chapter 1. Actually, I could even go all the way back to Exodus 20. Because where were the Israelites whenever they got the 10 commandments? They had just left a time period of suffering or persecution. They're at Mount Sinai in the wilderness, and God proved to be faithful. But let's go to Daniel 1. Daniel 1 begins with heartbreak. Daniel 1, 1 through 3, in very short succession, like very succinctly says, the temple is destroyed and all of God's people were taken into Babylon in exile. Like the group of people were experiencing what John is experiencing on Patmos in Revelation. They're taken into exile. And while they're in exile, some of the people that were brought in were grabbed by the Babylonians, and they were going to be brought into their courts of officials. So they were being trained as wise men. And of those people was a guy named Daniel, and I'm going to use their Babylonian names, 3 other dudes named Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. Ever heard of them? Or Rakshak and Benny. Ever heard of that? Okay, there we go. All right. No Veggie Tales outside of, okay, all right, okay. These 4 are in chapter 1 being trained. But here's the problem. Part of their training has to do with their diet. And they are being served meat that had been sacrificed to Babylonian idols. And they're like, okay, we know you've taken over everything of our identity, but there's some things we're not going to compromise, like what we eat. God commanded us what to eat, and we can't eat this. The royal official goes, I hear you, but if you don't eat what I give you, or you become malnourished, then I'm going to get killed. And Daniel's like, all right, I'm not trying to put you in a bad situation, so how about this? Let's make a deal. 10 days. 10 days. We will eat what we want to eat, and after 10 days, if we are not doing well, we'll do what you're saying. Royal official's like, all right, 10 days? Like, yeah, he's like, deal. And then it says, and after 10 days, the 4 were what? Not only better health, but even more wise than everyone else. The number 10, a number of completion, usually attached to a time period of suffering or persecution, like in exile, through which God proves to be faithful. Now, you go to the 144,000. God's people times a trinity of tens. Catch that? Remember what I told you the cosmic battle was between? The Holy Trinity and the Unholy Trinity. Shouldn't surprise you that we see the number 10, a number of time period of suffering and persecution, tripled multiple times, like the 1,000 years. In Revelation 20, I always find this interesting. When people describe the 1,000 years as this time period of peace and bliss, and I'm like, did you weigh that number? Because that number doesn't communicate bliss, communicates suffering. Proves that God's going to be faithful, but suffering's embedded in the very number itself. People are like, I think you're stretching this, hippie. Okay, but the problem is we do this too. We do this with numbers too. We just did it earlier. Didn't we? Or let me do this. Have you ever gone up in a skyscraper and let's say you're going to the 15th floor? You're not going to take the stairs. What are you going to do? You're going to take that elevator. And you get in and you're like 11, 12. What do you notice? There's no 13 in the elevator. And everybody's okay with this? Like, I always have those moments where I'm like, dude, you really want me to go from there up to there and you can't count to 15 without skipping a number? Like, I'm not so sure this is architecturally sound. Like, I think I maybe should think about my choices in life. No, what is happening? What? Yeah, we're going to say superstition. I'm going to say it this way. The number 13 weighs something in our society. There's a different weight. This evil, something cursed, something superstitious, something you know what? It's just better to skip the number and move on with life, even if you don't believe it. You know, like walking under a ladder. It's like, I'll just walk around. 7 years is a long time to have bad luck. Catch that illusion? Anybody? What about this? 9/11. Okay, no, wait a minute. This is weird. I just said two random numbers, and I hear, mm-hmm. And there's a lot of heads doing this. What is happening right now? What are we thinking of? What? 9/11, 2001. Now we added numbers, and everybody's still good with it? Do you remember where you were 9/11? Did you just hear my sentence? Do you remember where you were 9/11? And you all know what I'm saying. I remember where I was 9/11. I was on Ozark Christian College's campus walking up from the cafeteria up the massive hill to Williamson. The only reason why I went into that cursed dormitory was because everybody was pouring into it. I'm like, what's going on? And I go into the lobby, and I'm in there for 30 seconds when we're watching the TV, and I watch that second plane hit the tower. And I remember thinking, what does this mean? We actually canceled class the rest of the day, and we went into the chapel, and we prayed for like 2-3 hours of worship and prayer. And I remember going to the gas station that afternoon. The line was all the way out, and gas had surged to $1.39. It really did. I know, because that Conoco got fined for price gouging about 6 months later and had to shut down. I also remember that the summer after 9/11, I went to the Middle East to evangelize because I didn't know how else to respond but with the love of Jesus. Those numbers have a lot of weight. No one in here would be like, you forgot 10. Everyone has something deeply emotional attached to that. And all they are numbers. But are they just numbers? It's one of those things I find interesting whenever I'm like talking about numbers in Revelation. It's like, it sounds like you're making up a lot of stuff. But we have the same thing. But they can't? No, they do. And if you don't know this, you don't embrace this, you're going to make a lot of silly mistakes. Like I made a mistake when I was in Russia preaching on Revelation. Teaching at a couple different cities. I was in this one city called Gush Kristalny, and then went to a city called Kostroma. And in Kostroma, there was this interpreter. Her name was Helen. She was the best interpreter to this day that I have ever encountered in my life. Helen was so good that I didn't have to pause at all. She could keep up. And if you've ever heard somebody speak through an interpreter or spoken through an interpreter, that's insane. Typically, when you speak through an interpreter, you say 1 to 3 sentences, you stop, they translate the whole thing, then you say 1 to 3 sentences, stop. Before I started speaking, and I speak fast, Helen goes, hey, just by the way, you don't need to pause. And I was like, what? She's like, you just talk. It'll be fine. And I was like, okay. And so I get up there, and I forgot. And so I say 1 to 3 sentences, I stop, and I look over, and she stopped. And I'm kind of like, wait, did I hear her saying something? And so then I kind of said 1 to 3 more sentences, and this time, as I'm saying it, I'm hearing her talk, and I'm like, this is not possible. How is this possible? It blew me away to the point where afterwards I went up to this guy named Alex. I said, Alex, we have to do something special for Helen. This is the most amazing thing I've ever experienced. I said, can we get her like a dozen roses? He's like, why would you want to do that? And slammed his fist down. I was like, whoa, what happened? And he goes, in Russia, an even number of roses means you want her to die. And I was like, yo. I was like, 13 roses would be great. 13, it'd be awesome. Numbers have a weight to them. And we have this in our culture. It is in other cultures, and it is also in the book of Revelation. Which means this, when you are reading Revelation, you come across numbers, and all you do is measure 1,000 years, you're missing the meaning. You're retranslating dates. you're taking away the import of the power of the symbol. And this talk of symbols shouldn't shock us. God speaks in symbols all the time. Like, think about the ways that God describes himself as God in the Old Testament. Name out some of the things that we know of God in the Old Testament. I am. What's that? Compassion. This hesed. A hen. He puts like a mother hen with his wings shrouding, protecting them. Jesus even uses that in Matthew 23. Oh, Jerusalem, Jerusalem, how I've longed to gather you like chicks under the wing of a mother hen. What else? Tower of, this fortress. Father. These are all symbols. What about Jesus? The Lamb, the life, the what? Savior, the lion, the life, the truth, the way, the resurrection, the door, the shepherd, right? Like most of those I just quoted from John's gospel alone. You know, the same dude that wrote Revelation. What about the church? Bride. You know what's fascinating about that? Every time I say, what about the church? That's the first thing that almost every time I go and speak, that's the first thing everybody says. That's only used like once or twice in the Bible. The biggest one, Revelation. Revelation 21. New heavens and the new earth is descending as a bride beautifully dressed for her husband. Revelation 19, verses 9 through 11. She is dressed beautiful in white linen as a bride prepared for her husband. And the fine linen stands for the righteous acts of the saints. What else? The church. The body of Jesus Christ. The temple. You ever heard that one? Look, God understands that the best way to communicate the things that matter the most is through symbols, because what symbols focus on is grabbing things that are beyond us and pulling them down to us so that we can actually interact with them. It's the reason why whenever we talk about, like if I talk about my love for my wife, it always starts to blur and blend into the language of poetry, because my dedication to my wife is so intense that frankly just saying, I love her, is too small. It's not big enough. It's like, no, I would die for her. And even that, I'm like, you don't understand. She is my everything. And then people are like, what about Jesus? And I'm like, it's a symbol. But it means it. I mean it. This is the way we speak. This is the way Revelation is speaking, because they're in a time period of severe tension, and things are happening to them that are so far beyond what words can contain that it wouldn't surprise me that it moves into the language of poetry. Is this making sense? Here's the problem. How in the world do we interpret symbols? Let's do this. I'm going to go through a barrage of symbols, and as soon as you see it, I want you to yell it out. Like as soon as you know what it is, yell it out. Ready? Ready? Okay. Go. Oh, do I need to duck? I'm sorry. Okay, now here's what's interesting. A couple of things that are interesting. First of all, y'all were on a roll. Until you guys were on a roll. Second thing that's interesting is there was not a single word on the screen except for what do these symbols mean? Not even when Starbucks was up there. I made sure I found the symbol. There was no words on Starbucks or Nike, and you knew them. You even knew, if I say Starbucks, if I put that symbol up there, what are we in the context of? What is the conversation going to center around? Symbols are so powerful that they spend millions of dollars on marketing to come up with it and to saturate your world with it, so much so that whenever you even see the combination of colors, it makes you think of it. And if you look at most Starbucks, now they've kind of gone back, but usually the big sign, not the one that's on the actual building, but the big sign usually has no letters. It's just a big symbol. because that's how powerful the symbol is. The bummer is there was 2 people that actually said it right, which is pretty rare. When you get to this, most people have no idea what is happening. No idea what's happening. 2 people, though, said it right. Who said it right? It was over here. Somebody said soccer. What made you think soccer? The color palette. Maybe the ball at the bottom. Anything else? Okay. What's this? What is that? Anybody know? It's the World Cup trophy. This is the symbol of the 2006 World Cup in Germany. Now, here's what's really fascinating about this. Whenever I do this, typically no one gets it even close. No. But I like your symbolic thinking. I think it's wonderful. Oh, I don't have a candy bar. I can give you a bottle of water. Okay. No? Okay. What I find interesting about this, though, is that we don't know it, and yet this is the most famous sport in the world. And it's not even close. Like, the numbers are so ridiculous that it's laughable. If you want to talk about the most famous sport in the world, set soccer aside and you can have a debate. If soccer's in it, there's no debate. The numbers are unreal. But we don't even know what this is. Why? Because it's not the most popular sport here. Football starts in 21 days. That's the most popular sport here. Right? What's the difference? We don't have the context. That's it. Kind of like this. What is this symbol? I know what some of you are trying to do. You're trying to read this pixelated letters. You're like, I can cheat, and I might be able to get the right answer and get a candy bar this time. No. The problem is those letters mean nothing. This is the symbol for the Egyptian Bridge Club. It says National Sports Council of Egypt, but I'm like, really? Sports, bridge? Okay. I guess your definition of sports is different than mine, but we'll let it slide. How come you didn't know this? Because you don't have the context. This is why this is so important. When it comes to Revelation, you have to build the context. Otherwise, you not only won't know what the symbol is, you'll have to just make stuff up. And this is the reason why the book of Revelation gets so many wild interpretations. Because we don't even have the context, and people are just like, I don't know, Apache helicopters. And everybody's like, sounds good to me. Of course, 50 years later, it's like, how'd that prediction go? Yeah, it just like every other prediction, just didn't work. So what do? The answer to figure out how to interpret symbols is in the word context. It's just I'm going to use the word context and capitalize it different 3 times. So the first thing you do when you come to a symbol to figure out what does it mean is you go all lowercase letter context, which means this. Just read 5 verses before and 5 verses after. You'll be surprised how often in the Bible, when you come across a verse and you're like, this seems weird. If you just read 5 verses before and after, you can pretty much most of the time go, oh, okay. That makes sense. So let's do this. I'm going to turn to Acts because it's a little less threatening than the book of Revelation. So Acts chapter 7, verse 60. I'm going to read it out of context, and I want us to interpret it out of context. I do not want you to tell me what it actually means. I want you to tell me what it means, quote unquote, literally. Verse 60. Then he fell on his knees and cried out, Lord, do not hold this sin against them. And when he had said this, he fell asleep. Let's interpret that out of context. Go. What just happened? Somebody fell. Maybe he's saying his nightly prayers. He's about ready to go to sleep. Maybe trips to his knees, and he's like, Lord, don't be mad at that guy. I know my boss is a jerk, but don't hold it against him. That's not ridiculous out of context, right? Let's just go back 5, 6 verses. Go back to verse 54. The context of this is Stephen preaching to the Sanhedrin, the Jewish leaders. Stephen, who becomes a deacon of the church at the beginning of Acts 7, is now a mouthpiece for the church here at the end. Verse 54, when the members of the Sanhedrin heard this, what was he doing? He was preaching how Jesus can be found all through the Old Testament. That's what his whole sermon is. He's like, look at Moses, Jesus. Look at Abraham, Jesus. Look at Jacob, Jesus. Like, that's this whole sermon. Sanhedrin, when they heard this, they were furious, and they gnashed their teeth at him, which literally means to grind your teeth in anger. But Stephen, full of the Holy Spirit, looked up to heaven, and he saw the glory of God and Jesus standing at the right hand of God. That is the only time in the Bible that Jesus is at the right hand of God and he is not seated. He is standing, which might mean something significant is happening. As a matter of fact, when the king stands, all of heaven stands. What is significant? The first Christian to follow in the exact footsteps of Jesus to their death is about ready to enter heaven. And Jesus wants to greet him with an ovation. Look, he said, I see heaven open and the Son of Man standing at the right hand of God. At this, they covered their ears, and yelling at the top of their voices, they all rushed him. Let me just stop and say this. Please do not respond to God's revelation like that. I know there's things we've even talked about today from the scriptures that maybe you don't like. Whatever you do, don't put your hands over your ears, yell at the top of your lungs, and charge. Take your hands off your ears, sit and listen, and maybe think, maybe I don't know is the right posture to embrace this moment. But that's not how they embrace it. They put the hands on their ears, they yell at the top of their lungs, they charge at him, verse 58, they drag him out of the city, and they began to kill him with stones. They began to stone him. Meanwhile, the witnesses laid their coats at the feet of a young man named Saul. We've talked about him. Verse 59, while they were stoning him, Stephen prayed, Lord Jesus, receive my spirit. Does that sound like anybody? Who you worship, you should take on their characteristics. You should look like them. Jesus on the cross says, Father, into your hands I commit my spirit. Then verse 60, then he fell on his knees and he cried out, Lord, do not hold this sin against them. Does that sound familiar? Who does that sound like? He's hanging on the cross and all of the people mocking and jeering him. Crazily, Jesus says, Father, don't hold this against them. They don't even know what they're doing. I'm just going to say, that's a wild moment. It is really hard to learn how to forgive somebody after they've hurt you. It is unbelievable to be interceding on the behalf of the person that is mutilating you as they're doing it. But that's what it means to follow Jesus. And Stephen does what Jesus does, prays for his enemies, and it says, when he had said this, he fell asleep. What does the word asleep mean? Isn't that interesting that you knew what that symbol asleep meant, and all we did was read 5, 6 verses before? That's it. Now it has nothing to do with a nap or a bedtime moment. It's about death. Why? Because whenever you go to sleep, what do you assume? Yeah, that it's not the end of the story. Which makes it a much better metaphor for a Christian death than what we traditionally understand death to be. It's not the end of the story for Christians. It's more like closing your eyes. And man, I don't know about you, but whenever I close my eyes to go to sleep, it's almost like next thing I know, I'm like, I'm awake. See what I mean? Let the symbols breathe. How? Just by reading them in context. 5 verses before, 5 verses after. Sometimes though, especially in Revelation, you'll do that and you'll be like, that didn't help. That actually just made things worse. So let's take an example. Let's actually go to Revelation. Revelation chapter 20, verse 1 says, and I saw an angel coming down out of heaven, having the key to the abyss. I want us to center on the symbol key. The key to the abyss, and holding in his hand a great chain. If you read the next 4 verses, he seizes the dragon, that ancient serpent called the devil who leads the whole world astray. He seizes him, binds him, puts him in prison. Then you have this 1,000 years of reigning with Christ on a throne. And then in verses 7 through 10, you have the Satan released. At this point, you're going, okay, reading after didn't really help clarify the key. If you read before, it's just as weird. Rider on the white horse, they're gathered for a battle. There is no battle. He speaks, wipes them all out. There's nothing about a key. If you come across a symbol and it's like this, then you have to expand your search. At that point, what you need to do is you need to ask the question, how is the symbol used in the whole book of Revelation? And it's not hard to find. You don't have to have the book memorized. There's actually a website, you can write this down, I'll repeat it 2 to 3 times. There's a website called blueletterbible.org. 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 That you can go on there and it has every translation, and you can even go into a verse, you can click on a word, and you can do what's called a word study. You click it and it shows you every time that word appears in the actual Bible. But what you want to do for the symbol in Revelation is you want to say, okay, cool, I love how it's being used, in Matthew, but I want to see how it's being used in Revelation. In the book of Revelation, the word key is used 4 times. Now that's huge if you weigh numbers. The number 4 in Jewish literature is a number of completion usually attached to the earth or creation itself, like the 4 corners of the earth, the 4 winds, or check this out, every tribe, tongue, people, and nation. Remember last night I said, I'm doing something on my fingers and we'll talk about it tomorrow. It was in Revelation chapter 6, verse 15. Do you remember how many I counted to? 7. Why? Because it was describing the complete number of evil that were engaging in this creative act, which was going to be the uncreation and recreation of the world. Remember, Judgment Day, the stars falling from the sky. The number 7 itself was saying the same thing as all of the images. We just didn't understand the context of the 7. The key symbol, though, is used 4 times. Pay attention always to the very first time the word or the symbol is used, because that usually sets the stage. First time key is mentioned in the book of Revelation is Revelation chapter 1. Revelation chapter 1, it's in verse 18, but let's read verse 17. John says, let me say this. I actually believe verses 17 and 18 summarize the entire book of Revelation. I think this is the message. When I, John, saw Jesus, I fell at his feet as though dead. And then he reached out and he placed his right hand on me and said, don't be afraid. That's Revelation. That Jesus finds us in an exile of deadness. And when he comes, we are so ravaged by the world that we fall at his feet. But then he makes the first move. He reaches across the chasm, places his hand on us, and then says this brilliant command that is used 365 times in the Bible. Do not be afraid. Why? Because whenever you fear, you become someone different. It is the reason why Satan does whatever he can to make you afraid of him. Because if you fear him, that means you revere him. Fear is a way of saying this: whatever I'm engaging is beyond what I think that I can handle. It is above me, beyond me, more powerful than me. It terrifies me. In a context of worship, that puts you in your proper place between you and God, and he reaches out and says, and I love you. Satan wants to be worshiped as God, which is why he does things to trick you, deceive you, and to make you think that what you have to do is to fear him or to fear death itself. If you fear death, you might actually be tempted to crucify people, not be willing to be crucified. See what he's doing? 365 times, one for every day. God goes, don't be afraid. Why? Because the only thing you have to fear is me, and I love you. He falls down as though dead. Jesus places his right hand on him and says, don't be afraid. Now listen to this context. He says, I am. These are identity markers. I am the first and the last. In other words, I am the eternal one, the beginning and the end, who was and is to come. Same way of saying the same thing. I am the living one. I was dead. What is that a reference to in red letters? I'll give you a hint. Yeah, the crucifixion. I was dead, the cross, but now look, I'm alive forever and ever. What's that a reference to? So the context of this is John's deadness, and Jesus is spanning the chasm in order to bring him back to life. The same way that when he was dead, he came back to life. And then he says this, and I hold the keys of death and Hades. This won't shock you, but keys is a symbol of authority. Why does that not surprising? Say it again. Key to the city. There's some sort of honor or authority attached to that. Say it again. Locks and doors and gates. So for example, I have a car out there. It is a rental car. Who has the key? Why do I have the key? Because of ownership, authority, sovereignty. Because they entrusted it to me, not you. You don't have a key to my house. You better not have a key to my house. Mom and Dad, you're okay. You know what I mean? I don't have a key to your house because it's your house. Keys is authority, sovereignty, ownership. How did Jesus get the keys, the sovereignty, authority, ownership over death and Hades? Through the cross and the resurrection. So the symbol for key, the very first time it is used, it is in the context of the death and resurrection of Jesus, through which he secured sovereignty over all of hell and death. You catch this? Now turn to Revelation chapter 20. And how does this, I'm going to use the phrase, binding of Satan, how does it begin? And I saw an angel coming down out of heaven holding the key to the abyss. Did you catch it? What is the context? Using that symbol, what is the context of this event? The authority attained at the cross and resurrection of Jesus Christ. Like I'm gonna do this little teaser because we're gonna want to probably talk about it at some point anyway. The binding of Satan. Maybe you don't. Who cares? This is part of the reason why I go, no, I actually believe Satan is bound today. Of course, people are like, that's ridiculous. Turn on the TV. Bound doesn't mean eradicated. It means limited. Right? You know, a lot of the most significant letters that Paul wrote, he was bound in chains in a prison. His ministry didn't end. He just couldn't go travel to the cities. What I have to be convinced of, and I mean this, I wrestle with this. If Satan is not bound today, I have to be convinced that Jesus' life, death, resurrection, and the giving of the Holy Spirit didn't limit Satan at all. I just don't buy that. I'm going, no, Satan's back on his heels. Now, he wants to convince me that he isn't. But I remember something in Matthew 16 where Jesus says, on this rock I will build my church and the gates of Hades will not even be able to overcome it. Notice though, gates is a defensive weapon. Gates is where you retreat behind whenever you're losing the battle on the battlefield. And you're hoping those gates hold, because if they don't hold, you lose your whole city, your kingdom's gone. And in Matthew 16, the gates belongs to hell. They're the ones cowering. Why? Because the king is here. And when light comes, darkness flees. It has to. That's why darkness and light, they are not equal opposites. They're opposites, but they are not equal. The moment you turn on a light switch, dark's not like, I'm going to push you back. No, if you are at nighttime and you have a flashlight, everywhere you move the light, darkness runs. Because they're opposites, but light is always the most powerful in this opposite. But the way that we live, and the way that we interpret the world around us is through this veil that convinces us that darkness is winning. When I look at this world, I see it primed and ready for a resurrection if Christians would just wake up and beat Christ. We look at this world and we say, Satan's winning. What did people think when Jesus was being crucified? But what was the truth of this moment? Satan wasn't winning. This is how Christ came into glory. It might just be an optic issue, not an actual issue. Where do I get this? Not just from this, but from words like key. Why does he use the word key to talk about the binding of Satan? Because that is what limited him. The cross, resurrection, ascension, giving of the Spirit. You can disagree with me and still get an A, but at least understand what the symbol is pointing to. Does that make sense? That symbol key is in that context, and that cannot be denied when you look at the context through the whole book, even if you deny the conclusion. Fair? If that doesn't work, last way to interpret a symbol. If looking 5 verses before and after doesn't work, the whole book doesn't work, then you need to go to the Old Testament. And here's the reason why. By my count, in 404 verses of the book of Revelation, there are over 516 allusions to the Old Testament. Over one allusion every single verse. Which means this: if you do not know your Old Testaments, you will not understand the imagery of the book of Revelation. You will not get it. It's like whenever people were like, I think, the scorpions in Revelation 8 and 9, I think they're Apache helicopters. I'm like, have you read Joel and Amos? Because, that image is, kind of a big deal in those texts. And it's pretty clear what it is. Or like when people are like, the two witnesses, I think they're these two people, and I think it's these two people. And I'm like, have you read about Elijah and Moses? And have you read about their interaction with Jesus? Let's do this. Let's just do this really quick. It's going to be a short little exercise. Turn to Revelation 11. I think this was preached on a couple months ago anyway, right? Am I right on that? Okay. But Revelation 11 is interesting when you understand the story before the story. I'm going to start in verse 3. He's talking about the two witnesses. He says, and I will appoint my two witnesses, and they will prophesy, which would mean to reveal who God is, what God desires, what he demands of his people, for 1,260 days, or 3.5 years. Half of 7. Anyway, clothed in sackcloth, which means in mourning. They are the two olive trees and the two lampstands, and they stand before the Lord of the earth. He's referring there to Zechariah. And in that, Zechariah sees these two olive trees and these two lampstands. He's like, what are these? And the angel goes, well, these are the two anointed ones on the earth, which would mean the king and the priest. Well, that's what they are, the king and the priest. Do we have anybody that we know that's a king and a priest in the Bible? Yeah, I was going to say, go with the easy answer. Jesus. Yeah, just keep that in mind. In the order of Melchizedek, is he not, right? That's a fascinating Genesis passage. Where did this guy come from? Oh, he's just the king of Salem. Was that a precursor of Jerusalem? What's happening here? We'll talk about it in Hebrews. Okay. Verse 5. If anyone tries to harm them, fire comes from their mouths and devours their enemies. This is how anyone who wants to harm them must die. Do you remember any time in the Old Testament where fire came and devoured enemies? Elijah on Mount Carmel. Remember that? Where there's this war between the deities. And whoever can worship their God enough to get the God to light the sacrifice on fire wins. Not only did Yahweh light it on fire, but the fire devoured all of the prophets of Baal. Remember that? So now we have Elijah. Elijah was known as the quintessential prophet. The prophet. Keep reading. If anyone, verse 6. They have power to shut up the heavens so that it will not rain during the time they are prophesying. Does that remind you of anything from the Old Testament? Give you a hint. We've already said the name. Elijah. So now you very clearly have king priest, Elijah the prophet. And they have the power to turn the waters into blood and to strike the earth with every kind of plague as often as they want. Who does that remind you of? Moses. You know what Moses was a symbol of? The law. Do you know how you want to summarize the whole Old Testament in the New Testament? You can refer to it as what? The law and the prophets. Matthew 5:17. I did not come to abolish the law and the prophets. I came to fulfill them, Jesus says. There's a reason why also that in Matthew chapter 17, something happens on what we call the Mount of Transfiguration. When Jesus and the inner three go up there, and Jesus turns into this human light bright, he starts to glow, who appears? Elijah and Moses, the law and the prophets, and they begin to speak and to converse with the word. And as they're talking, Peter says something stupid. It's great that we're here, Lord. Maybe we should put up tents and stay here forever. And literally, not joking, this cloud comes from heaven, and the voice says, shut up. I'm like, listen to my son. It so overwhelms the disciples, they fall down. And when they look up, all that is left is Jesus. Why? Because he fulfills the law and the prophets. Because he is the king and the priests. Catching this? What is the two witnesses actually referring to? Jesus. Do you remember what happens to them? They're going to be attacked in a minute in the city that our Lord was killed in, which would be Jerusalem. And then their bodies lay for how long? 3.5 days. And then they resurrect and come up alive on their feet. And people are freaking out. And then it says they ascend on clouds to heaven. Does this remind you of anyone? Anyone? Then people go, well, then why are there two prophets? This is the way that I always say this. Who are the two witnesses based on the Old Testament and Jesus' witness, Jesus' narrative? The two witnesses is the body of Christ, double meaning intended. It is retelling the story of Jesus. And it is saying, in body of Christ, this should be your story. Which is why in verse 14 of Revelation 11, it is so fascinating, where there is this earthquake, and it is the only time in the entire book of Revelation where it says that evil turns and gives glory to God. Every other time, evil shakes their fist at God. Why do they turn and give glory to God? Because the church was being the witness to the resurrected Christ by how they lived. In the shape of Christ himself, kind of like Stephen. See the message? How did I come with that interpretation? By knowing my Old Testament, by reading Zechariah, by reading 1 Kings, by reading Exodus, and by seeing how this is understood through the revelation of Jesus Christ. Because what Revelation does is it says, you won't even be able to understand the Old Testament if you don't know Jesus. But you won't be able to understand Jesus if you don't know the Old Testament. I'm now quoting from 2 Corinthians 3. Like 2 Corinthians 3 makes this so painfully clear. Paul actually uses this image when it comes to the Jews of his day reading the Old Testament. He says, it reminds me of whenever Moses went up on the mountain and he saw the glory of God. And when he came down, what did Moses have to do because his face was so bright? He had to wear a veil. He says they are reading the Old Testament as through a veil. But Christ came and removed the veil so that now we can stare into the face of the glory of God. And it not only doesn't kill us, it transforms us into his image. Revelation is dripping with the Old Testament. Because it assumes that you understand that without the Old Testament, you don't understand Jesus. But without Jesus, you do not understand the Old Testament. Like this is the constant conversation between them. So before we take a break, I want to give you, I want to say 2 cautions. I'm going to do the first one really quick, and the last one will send us off, okay? First caution when you're interpreting symbols is this. Do not read your story, your culture back into the image. Stop that. Usually the example I use for this is Mark chapter 8, where Jesus says, if anyone wants to follow me, deny themselves, take up your cross, then follow me. When we hear cross, a lot of times we think salvation. At the time when Jesus said that, though, salvation from the cross was 7 chapters away. It didn't mean that then. In that moment, from the eyes of a Roman, the cross was a symbol of a failed revolution because only political revolutionaries were executed on crosses, which is why Barabbas is such an interesting figure. Barabbas, the name Barabbas literally means son of a dad. Why is that his name? Because he's disguising his identity so that you don't know who his family is, so you don't go after them for his crimes. What's your name? Son of a dad. See what he's doing? Bar-Abba, Bar-Abbas, Barabbas. He is guilty, though, Luke's gospel says, of committing murder in a political uprising. So whenever Pilate says, do you want this convicted murder of a political uprising, or do you want Jesus who's guilty of nothing? And they say, Jesus. He literally takes the place of a political revolutionary, but let's not pretend he wasn't political. Our Father, who art in heaven, hallowed be thy name. See what I mean? But the problem is, if you're hanging on a cross, it means your revolution has failed. So when Jesus says, you want to come follow me? Take up your cross and follow me. Romans go, you want me to join a failed revolution? Jesus goes, do you trust me? It's way worse for the Jew in that moment. Because the Jews have read Deuteronomy 21 through 22, which says, anyone who hangs on a tree is cursed by God. Jesus goes, are you willing to be cursed by God to follow me? And they're like, what do you mean? I mean, do you want to follow me to such an extent that even if God curses you, you will go where I go? When Jesus says, if anyone wants to follow me, take up your cross, deny yourself, take up your cross and follow me. The reason why deny yourself is such an important first entry point is because the only way you can embrace this message from a Roman perspective or a Jewish perspective is if you learn how to deny what you want. This call is not small. It's enormous, but the only way you get to that is if you don't read your stuff back into that passage. Let that passage be what it is. Caution number 2. Don't lose the forest by focusing on one tree when it comes to the symbols. I know I just used a symbol to teach you how to read symbols. But sometimes you can get so focused on one tree, you miss the whole stinking forest. Okay, let me give you an example. I'm going to zoom all the way in on a picture. We're really zoomed in, and I want you to tell me, what do you see? Somebody literally just said nothing. I see nothing. There is something. What is it? It's not a Rorschach test. Like, I'm not going to, psychoanalyze you. Bacteria? Whoa, it's getting real. Sideways? Is that what you said? Smiley face? Oh, I weirdly see it, but it also looks like half a skeleton or something. Here, let me zoom out just a little and see if it helps. What do you see? A hand. Now that's interesting because I heard this several times when you just did that. You all said hand, but some of you went, a hand. Exegete that for me. What does mean? Oh, I get it now. Oh, somebody just reinterpreted though. They said a child's hand. They actually put an age to the blob. Let's zoom out a little bit more and confirm your suspicions. What do you see? It's a child's hand. It's their arm. Let's zoom out one more. What's a little girl? It's actually my baby girl. This is Paigey. When you're all the way here, you're so zoomed in, you cannot even see the beauty of what's in front of you. You can be focused on one tree so intently, you miss the whole stinking forest. We actually have to zoom out one more time, okay? We're trying to get a family picture. And this little turd will not, you see my face going, Paigey, why won't you come over here? Now notice this. Here, it's like, little turd. It's, conflict. But notice this. When you're zoomed in even just a little too much, you get the exact opposite interpretation. Exact opposite. It's one of those things where this happened. I can't go into this into super detail. But in Daniel chapter 9, verses 21 and following. People always hold this up to me and they say, to me, this is the image of the Antichrist. It's really uncomfortable. And I do the best I can in person and via email to be as gentle as I can. I say, I don't know how to say this to you, but who you just called the Antichrist is actually Christ. He's the one that puts a stop to the sacrifices in the temple. Because the whole point of Daniel 9 is to say, why are you so focused on a building instead of the person? Because you know what Daniel was praying for at the beginning of Daniel 9:21? He was praying at the time of sacrifice, which would have meant he was asking God this question: what do we do in exile with all of our sin that keeps piling up because we don't have a temple to sacrifice and for it to be taken care of? He's asking for the building to be replaced. And the angel comes and responds and says, you're looking for a building, you should be looking for a person, because the temple will be rebuilt again, but then this person will come and put a stop to the sacrifice once and for all. We celebrate that in Hebrews as Jesus, but you can be so zoomed in that you look at it and say, Antichrist. Make sure you don't lose the forest by focusing on one little tree. You do that, symbols aren't that hard.